Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in another episode of Rising Stars. And today it's my honor to welcome Manolis Kellis, who is the professor of computer science and artificial intelligence at MIT. Manolis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Alan. Really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And since the goal of this talk really is to inspire the next generation of young biomedical professionals, let's start with the question: what inspires you the most to do the work you do?
So I would say there's several factors. First of all, I'm a lifelong learner. So I think that the first aspect is I love learning and I love teaching, and the two go hand in hand. Every time one of my students TAs or teaches one of the class that I teach, they say, wow, I've learned so much when TAing than when actually taking it as a student. And I think that the act of academia, of sort of constantly teaching, helps us learn deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that the two go hand in hand. You can't be a good teacher if you're not a good learner. And you can't be a good learner if you're not able to re-express the knowledge in your own terms. So that's my first source of inspiration, the fact that I'm just addicted to learning new things, constantly growing and expanding my own understanding of the physical world, of the natural world, of the world inside us, and frankly, of myself, like growing that way. The second aspect is related to that, and it's my own growth as a person. So basically, to become a better parent, to become a better teacher, to become a better scientist, to become a better advisor, a better mentor. So I think that again, as a professor, the mentorship aspect goes hand in hand with the self-growth, basically being able to serve as a role model for my own students by showing my own vulnerabilities, by showing my own growth, by showing that I'm here to learn as well from them, just as they are from me. And I think that's the second aspect. The third aspect is, as a scientist, the ability to discover aspects of the natural world and learn them first and then disseminate them second. So basically, I think that this ability to become the teacher from the world of nature and science, and the student, and then to become the teacher to the rest of our field. So the discovery and the dissemination. And then the last part is you can't be a scientist if you're not an engineer. And the last part is about building the tools, imagining, seeing the vision, designing, and bringing systems to life that allow me to carry out the scientific mission of discovery and dissemination. So the four aspects are learning and teaching, growing and mentorship, discovery and dissemination, and then building, imagining, designing, and bringing systems to life.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I think really important points for really everyone to hear, especially from experienced professionals such as yourself. And now for the slightly younger audience, what do you think are the three unique characteristics or skills that young scientists should have in order to increase their chances of a successful career in science?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's funny because I don't know if you can necessarily build those skills, but these are the skills that are nice to have, and but I think you can develop them. You can sort of find them in you and sort of grow them. And the three skills that I would say is, number one, asking good questions. In other words, have an insatiable curiosity, and then asking simple but deep questions. Sometimes the obvious ones, sometimes the ones that anyone entering a field might just say, hey, this is a dumb question, but, and it turns out that these are some of the deeper questions. In other words, yes, everybody has a ready-made answer for that simple question. But then when you probe more and you ask it again from a different angle and you dive deeply and you analyze the answer, you realize that very often we don't actually know the answers to the most fundamental questions. And I think that's what makes Nobel Prizes. That's what makes the best scientific papers. That's what makes the most impactful research. Basically being able to just come in with an open mind, with a virgin mind, a virgin, viewpoint, unadulterated by the perspectives that have been ingrained through years under the rug that we actually don't really know how this thing works. And then just simply say, I'm curious. Do you guys all know how this works? Because I don't. And I think that humility to ask the simple questions, I think is extremely important. The second one is just sheer talent, like having a mind that reasons, a clarity of thought, the ability to make connections, to understand quickly, to conceptualize not just individual points in isolation from what you're learning, but the landscape of knowledge for how all of these different pieces tie together, basically seeing not just the forest, and not just the trees, but both the forest and the trees. And I think that this is definitely something that you can grow, but it's something that the first time I meet like a young person, like, at any age, you can see that clarity of thought. And you can see that when they're writing me an email, when they're responding, like in everything, it just, permeates through every interaction, just that clarity of thought, the reasoning, the connectivity mind. So, and then the third one is the drive, what is often called grit, the ability to just bring things to completion. It's not just doing the fun first 80%. It's doing that last 20% that very often takes 80% of the time. It's the ability to deliver, to complete, to dive in and just forget the time of the day, just get sucked in, do deep work in long stretches. And there's an aspect of that is very important, which is time management is part of that drive. Basically being able to say no, being able to sort of compartmentalize, being able to say, like, for the next 4 hours, I don't have any distractions. And what I always tell my own children is be intentional. In other words, don't just show up in class and just like listen passively. Go and say, okay, what are we trying to learn today? What is the point? What am I trying to get out of it? So focusing on the goal, on its completion, not just the busyness of working, not just like, I'm doing good work. No. Like, say, what is my intent? What is my goal? So those are the three things: asking simple, clear-minded questions, the sheer talent in the clarity of thought, and to get things done.
Yeah, amazing. And the advice, you had an amazing career and you have an even better career later on. But if you went maybe 20, 30 years in the past, what advice would you give to yourself looking in hindsight with all the experience you have?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because it's very hard to say, oh, I've done all these things wrong. And
Yeah,
like, I am where I am because I did all these things wrong.
exactly.
And if I hadn't done
Net
them
you did
wrong, I
amazing
probably
things.
wouldn't be here. So, but the three things that I'm starting to learn as I'm growing up is number one, say no. Basically, I used to travel to 3 different conferences a week and fly always in and out. And I'm now just being so protective of my time. I'm just like, I don't need to speak at every conference that I get invited to. I don't need to travel to every place that I'm invited to. I think that this ability to just simply do the hard work and focus on the mission is something that I would have, loved to sort of teach my younger self. Like when I started as a young professor, I was like, oh, there's this university that wants me to go speak, and there's that conference, and I can make connections here, and there's this gathering, and there's etc. And that leads to over dilution. And yes, there are some ideas that can percolate from that, but I think the ability to spend deep, long hours with my own team is extremely, extremely important. So basically, saying no is super, super important. The second piece of advice is that you can't please everyone. Basically, you have to focus on your mission. And if people are asking you to do a bunch of stuff, you can constantly serve them and serve them and serve them. And I think of email as a back door to sabotage my own creativity. In other words, I wake up in the morning, I have a mission for the day, and if I check my email,
Yeah.
like, I end up doing the work of others, not my own mission. And I think every one of us has to be so focused on our own mission. So when somebody's inviting you to give a talk somewhere, you're giving them a favor. And you can't just spend your entire life doing favors, because at some point you're going to run out of favors. And what I'm trying to say is that the reason why they're asking you to speak is because you've done good work. But if all you do is speak about the good work that you did last year, you're not going to have any good work to talk about, the future year.
Yeah.
So basically, you have to be very, very protective of your time, and you can't please everyone. And then there's another aspect of not pleasing everyone, which is that very often you publish a paper and people will say, oh, there's too many supplementary figures, or they'll say, oh, you got this equation wrong, or I couldn't find X piece of information on your website, etc. And this is completely normal. This is this happens to everyone. And, you should just not be traumatized by the agony of, oh, I will leave a little thing out, because the best way to make no mistakes is to do absolutely nothing. And then the third piece of advice that I would give myself is be kind to yourself. Basically, give yourself the love, the respect, the forgiveness that you give to those around you. Basically, accept that nothing will be 100% perfect, and just stop agonizing, just move on. And it's, again, like I keep saying, it's very hard to give this advice because in a way it's who I am. And if I wasn't a perfectionist, if I wasn't constantly agonizing about all those things, maybe I wouldn't be where I am now. Yeah. So, take that advice with a grain of salt, but basically just be kind, be forgiving, be generous, and be respectful of yourself. Very often this humility is what makes us work really, really hard. But sometimes if you don't value yourself, others will not value you either. And I think it's important to just recognize your flaws, but also recognize your achievements and what you have accomplished and your contributions.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And since you're in the field of AI and AI, I feel like you may agree that or may not agree, it's just starting. So we're in the very early innings of it. I want to touch upon just a few questions briefly. In this age of AI, what would you recommend young people to learn better, or how to leverage AI for themselves to learn better?
Yeah. So AI has completely transformed the way that I work, and our entire team relies on AI for everything. So I can show up in back-to-back 5-minute or 10-minute meetings, and people bring all of the information for that. They prepare for weeks to sort of have this 10-minute meeting, and then they upload sometimes, pages and pages and pages of information. The ability to record every meeting, to have an AI summarization, to sort of lay out the plan, to be able to sort of, have all of that information be searchable, and continuity between, from meeting to meeting, basically means that I can speak much faster. I can sort of give much deeper information. I can expand a lot more on the points that they should be working on, without the fear that, oh, the human will not be able to capture everything at the baud rate that, I'm conveying the information. And I think that the ability to sort of use AI for summarization is the first one. The second one is for expansion. In other words, when I say to a student, do this and this and this and that and that, I mean every single one of those words. And if I just tell them and they write them down, it's one thing. But if I tell them and then I give AI that same recording and I say, please expand it out, tell me every single bullet point, then we now have a checklist. And item 7 on the checklist could have been overlooked, but now they can kind of say, oh no, I really know what that means. So my advice would be, record yourself, record your meetings, record your interactions, and then go back and expand them out using AI. The second one is for writer's block. ChatGPT can be an amazing companion because instead of doing the work, you can tell it what you would like to do. But the act of telling it is actually doing the work. In other words, very often I will just close my eyes and sort of, really think deeply and say, okay, first we need to do this and that. And, okay, here's the first section and here's the, its outline, and here's the second part, the outline, etc. And then I'll be like, okay, great. Now expand it out for me. And it will expand it out. And I will now have a canvas from which I can work. And then I will work with my students to sort of fill different parts in, etc. So I think that the interaction with ChatGPT can help in your own creative process by basically sort of outlining it. An example that I like to give is programming with a rubber duckling. The rubber duckling just sits there, and you're explaining what is the bug, or you can explain to the rubber duckling what is the essay that you want to write, and the act of explaining it is actually allowing you to sort of externalize all these thoughts and sort of serialize them and expand them out, etc. And then the last one is for learning. Use ChatGPT as a learning partner. Take an entire scientific paper, upload it, and ask questions. Like sometimes, I can skim the entire paper in like 3 minutes, and then I'll have a question on one part. And I will just upload the whole paper and then say, okay, dive into exactly the core of the methodology. Did they use this or did they use that? And, how does that relate to that method, in this method, et cetera? In other words, you can go through all of the breadth and all of the different connections in a conversational way with, again, the intentionality of I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to sort of extract the key nuggets of information. And then the last part is go deep. Don't just stay shallow. It's very tempting with ChatGPT to say, okay, tell me the key points. I got them. Move on. But the same AI can be used to say, okay, point 2, point 3, I'm not sure I understand it. Let's dive more deeply. What about that? And how does it connect to this, etc.? And I think being able to sort of use this to say, okay, now give me 3 papers I should read about this topic. And then you go and you read those papers in detail. And then you're like, okay, that part, I think that's really important, but I'm not sure I'm fully getting it. What are the papers that relate to that, etc.? So I think that this ability to dive, it's something that we've never had in the history of humanity. I mean, we've gone from oral passing of information to eventually the printed press, to eventually the World Wide Web, to eventually the instant communication and upload of papers in bioarchive and archive and other places. And we now have an integration machine that is able to take all that knowledge and just distill it out and sort of allow you to sort of, poke at it from very deep to very broad. And I would say embrace that. There's absolutely no excuse anymore for not learning. Like before, you were like, oh, I don't have access to a library. I don't have access to books, etc. No, now you have access to the most extraordinary tutor. Use them. It is up to your drive. It goes back to the 3 points: asking the right questions, having the clarity of thought, and having the drive. So if you have those 3 components, we now have all the tools for you.
Amazing. And just very briefly on the last couple of questions here, and really thank you so much again for this really insightful interview. So the last couple of questions, one is, we know AGI, artificial general intelligence, is coming. And is it going to come in 5 years, in 10 years? Obviously, you know much better than I do. But do you expect scientists, and this might sound kind of stupid in a way, but do you expect scientists to have jobs? What's going to be their role when AGI is here? And just kind of follow up on that, how is your group navigating that expected landscape in the next 5-10 years?
So my advice there would be that we need to sort of, again, realize that we've thought that humans would be replaced time and time again throughout humanity. And what we have seen instead is these extraordinary increases in productivity, in health, in medicine, in quality of life, in longevity, and so on and so forth. So I am optimistic. I think that we need 100 times more scientists than we have today, or even than there are alive today. In other words, if you look at the challenges ahead of us, we have countless genes to understand, countless pathways and diseases and disease mechanisms. Medicine is an enormous field. Biology is even more enormous. Chemistry, even more enormous. Physics, understanding the energy crisis that we have, the climate crisis, the food crisis, understanding pathogens and diseases, longevity, and the aging process. I think if you look at the stuff that we just have to do, it is way, way bigger than the entire population of scientists alive today, probably times 100. And I think if every one of us could boost their own productivity by a factor of 3 or a factor of 5 or a factor of 10, would still be far short of where, in my view, we need to be to truly address the challenges of our generation. We could accept as a species that, oh yeah, we'll just keep working at it for the next 1,000 years. But if I have loved ones that have a predisposition to Alzheimer's or cancer or, diabetes or heart disease, I don't have that kind of time. I don't want to wait 100 years. I want to eradicate disease in our lifetime. And that requires massive amount of collaboration between humans and AI. So if AGI was here already, I think we would still have a ways to go. I think that the human mind has achieved extraordinary things. I think we have built the most extraordinary assistants we could imagine. I don't think scientists are about to be replaced. I think what's going to happen is that our mundane tasks, the stuff that takes a lot of time and is tedious, will be replaced. And I can't wait for that. But I think the human creativity, the human coordination, these, bridging between the physical and the cognitive world, this ability to sort of bring ideas together, the agency that comes with humans. I think all of these things are, still unique, and AI is still a far way from being able to achieve that. But in my view, if you look at how the world has changed, every prediction has been wrong about the replacement of humans. And what I would say is that it's going to be the augmentation, that if what you love doing is mundane, repetitive tasks, you can still do them for fun. That might be pleasurable. But if what you want to do is solve really hard problems, then you can use the best agents and assistants that you have imagined with the new generations of AI coming up.
Amazing. And the last question, really, really briefly, is, many young scientists are in the process of publishing papers. They need to publish, in order to progress and so on and so forth. And many of them are thinking, should they publish open access? Should they not publish open access? What's the benefit or what's the cost of that, right? And what's your view on open access science? Is it crucial for science? Maybe you don't think it is. What's your opinion?
So, as I mentioned earlier, if you look at the path of humanity, we went from oral transfer of information, which was vertical, to dissemination through schools, the printed press, the libraries, and the World Wide Web, and Wikipedia, and then I mentioned in that series bioRxiv and archive and all of these open publishing venues. I think they have had an extraordinary impact on our community. Every paper that appears in bioRxiv, if you look at the final product a year and a half, sometimes 2 years later, I would say 99% of the paper is still there. It's like there's a few things that change, but the vast majority of the messages are there. Like the key nuggets, the take-home messages are there. And I think the ability to see this today, not in a year and a half, I think is enormous. I think that the horizontal dissemination of information is what makes a species grow exponentially in terms of the cognitive reach that we have had. Instead of this vertical parents to children sort of, education, we now have horizontal information. Discovery gets made in, Latin America. It gets immediately taken on by China, in Europe, in America. Like all of these things are sort of building on each other at a tremendous pace. And I think open access, open data science, I think all of that is paramount to this. Unfortunately, journals are charging an exorbitant amount to make a paper open access. Like sometimes it's like $12,000 to make a paper open access. And of course, very often we pay the fee. We've spent sometimes millions of dollars to carry out the experiments, to carry out the analysis, etc. And therefore, in the grand scheme of things, it's a small additional price to pay. And that basically means that the final version of the paper will be accessible to everyone through the journal website, using their formatting and all of the editing, etc. But, arXiv and bioRxiv and medRxiv, all of these websites allow you to do this before you even submit the paper. Basically, my advice to young scientists is your number of citations will go up, the number of people using your work will go up, every metric of success will go up. by making your papers open access. Not everybody can afford it, unfortunately, but there are also grants for doing that. So my advice would be, go for open access, buy your archive whenever possible, and then the journals as well whenever possible.
Amazing. Manolis, I think you gave so much good advice in this video. I have to rewatch it several times. So amazing to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.